Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie and I'm here to talk about React Native, what it is and how we can use it to build mobile apps. So let's start by talking a little bit about native apps, mobile web apps, and hybrid apps. So native apps, these are the ones that live on your devices. They are accessed through the device home screen. You can download them in the devices store. For iOS, it's the App Store, and for Android, it's the Google Play Store. These applications are specifically built for each platform. They require specific skill sets, such as Java for Android apps, and Objective-C or Swift for iOS apps. These are normally quite expensive to companies because they have to have two different teams for each platform, one for Java and one for iOS. So if they want to update the application or change things, they have to mirror all the changes in both platforms. So it's quite expensive. They can take full advantage of all the devices features, such as swipe gestures. They can access the camera, they can access the accelerometer, and the different features each device has. Mobile apps. These are run by a browser. These are the applications that we know so far that we can build with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But these ones are specifically built to fit different mobile devices screens. So that's the difference between native and mobile web apps. And now, let's talk about hybrid apps. Hybrid apps are somewhere between native apps and mobile apps. But these ones can actually they're actually built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and also with some native code. They are compiled to be wrapped in a web view so they can work on a mobile device as if they were native applications. They are quicker to build than native apps because you can write them with the technologies we know so far. And you can also reuse some of the code you use in one platform to the other. So they are quicker to build and less expensive. OK, so now that we talked about the different types of apps there are, let's take a look at some frameworks we have to build hybrid applications. We have Xamarin. This is the built by Microsoft. You need to use C# to build the applications. We have Cordova. This is one of the most famous ones. You use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build your applications, and then they are wrapped in a web view. And there's also Electron. You can use this with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript too. As I mentioned before, one big advantage of hybrid apps is their code reusability. You can use the same code for different platforms. You just have to change some specific things. OK, so where does React Native fit in all of this? So as you may have guessed, it fits under the hybrid apps category. But there's one special feature about React Native, is that you can build mobile applications using only JavaScript. So you might be wondering, what? How? So let's take a look at how is this possible. So I want to talk about two main components of React Native that are very important to understand a little bit how React Native works under the hood. So let's talk about, first, the React Native packager. This is a module bundler that, like Browserify or Webpack, it is specifically designed to be very fast at compilation time. It was built by the React Native team to specifically meet the needs for React Native. And it is a very smart bundler. It knows which types of files to serve up depending on the extension of your files. So when there's an Android.js, it knows it's an Android application. And when there's an iOS.js, it knows it's an iOS application. OK, so the other important thing we need to know, besides from the packager, is the bridge. This is a very oversimplified representation of the architecture of React Native. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the bridge. So we have three layers. We have the native layer, this is where all the native gestures happen. For example, when we click on the home screen of our native device, it knows an event happened. So in order for this event to be transported into JavaScript, it packages it up, and with all the dependencies, JavaScript needs to know that it happened, and it sends it through the bridge. The bridge is the one that allows for bidirectional communication between native and JavaScript. And when the package gets to JavaScript, JavaScript unpackages it, and it does what it needs to do, and then it packages it back, and it sends it through the bridge to React, to native. Now, one important thing to note about the bridge here is that we can see it has 3 lines on the JavaScript and 3 lines on the native layer, right? So we know that the bridge is asynchronous. It can handle different things at the same time. But it could be another whole presentation, so I'm not going to dig deeper into that. So those were the 2 main principles I wanted to talk about a little bit, so we can have a general understanding how it works under the hood. So now let's take a look at some coding examples with React Native, how it is to code with React Native. We can see here that we have a normal component. As we know, React, this is like a normal component that we've built in so far. It's nothing different. The only differences are that we are importing some modules like app registry and text. These are actually native modules that we can use inside our JavaScript to build our native application. The app registry, it's where you set all your input for all your JavaScript files. It knows this is going to be the input, like the root of your native application. So all the information that comes from native, it's going to go through this one, and it's going to go into the other components you declare. OK, so you might be wondering, how about styling and layout? How does this work with React Native, since you're just using JavaScript? So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's take the same example, and let's add some styling. We can see that we have a styling object that holds all the different styles that we define, and then we can use this object to reference all our stylings in our components, in our render method. This is the same example from the previous slide, and we can see that we took it from the upper corner, and we center it in the middle, and we added a native component that's called touchable opacity. You can build buttons with this, and what this is going to do is when you click on them, it's going to change the opacity of the color of the button. And one thing to note here is that layout in JavaScript, in React Native, it's done with Flexbox. So it's really easy to build your layout and to style them. OK, now these are some examples of native applications that have been built with React Native. Some advantages of React Native are there is an 80% plus code reusability. This is what the React Native team claims, that you can actually use the same code you use to build your iOS app to build your Android app, and you just need to change different native things that are different in the 2 platforms. You can write your own modules. If there is a module that doesn't exist yet on your React Native application, depending on which platform you're building, you can actually go and write your own module. They have this template you can use to define your module and then use it in your React Native application. Then, as I mentioned before, the layout and the styling, it's really easy because we're using Flexbox. You can use libraries like Redux and Lodash and the different JS libraries, since it's just plain JavaScript. And then it's going to wrap it in the bundler, and it's going to send them to native. And this is kind of like a quote from the React team. It's learn once, write everywhere. That's the React principle, that you can learn just how to use JSX and how to write different components, and you can reuse this principle to do the same thing over and over again. So that's why we can have code reusability with React Native. And I hope you guys have a better understanding now of React Native, how it works, and how you can build mobile applications with it. Thank you.